Phillips is back with us. She's president of clinical care at Providence Health System. She's on the phone from Seattle. Remember, we've told you this before, the first known U.S. case of COVID-19 was confirmed in Washington State at Providence. That was back in January of 2020. She and her team were the first to know this and really have to deal with it. The hospital is part of a massive system, and it includes about 51 hospitals, 800 clinics. It is huge, so they see a lot. And as I said, she joins us from Seattle. Dr. Compton Phillips, so nice to have you back here with Tim and myself. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me today.
So what are you seeing when it comes to COVID-19 cases, treatment? How would you assess the current situation when it comes to our fight against this pandemic?
Well, it's great that we're finally seeing a little bit of light at the end of our current tunnel that we've been going through. We keep thinking it's the last tunnel we have to hit, and I would love this to be the last one. We still do have in some of our markets, particularly in Alaska and in the eastern side of Washington State, crisis standards of care. So we're not completely out of the woods yet. But the
explain what that is for people who aren't familiar with that yet. Crisis standard of care.
Yeah, crisis standards of care is what you don't want if you go into the emergency room. It means that we really are beyond our capacity to help people with all the cutting edge care that you're normally used to, that we are either having to use, and the kind of the mnemonic that we use is spaces, supplies, and staff. So spaces, we're using places for care that don't normally take care of patients. So we might be using conference rooms, for example, to put patients in. Supplies, we might not have every ventilator that we need to put people on if their breathing fails, and instead we'll start using alternatives like high flow oxygen. And staff means we're using people to extend the skilled staff we normally have to staff ICUs, for example. So we might have one ICU nurse that's supervising two other nurses that came in from an outpatient clinic that don't normally work in an ICU, but to be able to extend what we typically do.
Crisis then,
absolutely. Like I said, it's not what you would want for you or your family. It's not what we want to provide. You do what you can when you have to.
So, and I thought it was so important what you said, seeing the light at the end of the current tunnel. And I do feel like every conversation we have, the caveat is, well, depending on COVID and depending on the trajectory of this virus, because we just don't know. What optimism do you hold on to? What worries you?
So the optimism I have is we now have seen around the globe countries that have been able to get things under control, even in the face of Delta. And the way they're doing that is with the layered containment strategies we know work. So really, really pushing on vaccines and vaccines that allow us to get back to life. So in countries where they, for example, like over in the EU, where they're requiring proof of vaccination to go out to dinner or into museum, vaccination rates have increased and they've gotten control of the pandemic. When we do things like use masks in congregate settings, particularly in places like schools, it works. When we increase ventilation, increase social distancing, it works. So I do believe that if we actually put science into practice, that we would get control of this wave and have it be the last one that we have to deal with.
One challenging thing to hear, and I think for many people to hear right now, is that yes, we can get it under control, but it requires a lot of sacrifice, I think, on an individual basis. Like, we haven't seen family in over 2 years, for example. We're not planning on flying because we have a young child before he's vaccinated. So it's like this new normal. Even though we can keep it under control, it's not something that we're all wearing masks around the office. Like, it's not great.
Yeah, and the really interesting thing is over in the EU, so look at Denmark, for example, they're back to normal. They're not wearing masks, but it's because they did the work to get it under control rather than having to keep going on with the containment strategies. Mm-hmm. As soon as particularly our kids can get vaccinated, it really will allow us to get back to normal, and we won't have to do all the layered containment. It'll just be contained. Now, the challenge we have is the misinformation that is stoking anti-vaccination fears is really, really traumatizing for communities. We have doctors and nurses that are zipping up body bags again in our ICUs and then go out to their cars and find a flyer on their windshield saying that vaccinations cause, and then choose your misinformation fact, and that they will be held accountable and that they're contributing to genocide. So it is incredibly challenging for our people who've been putting their lives and health and families' lives on the line for the past 18 months.
Right.
To be seen as the problem rather than the solution to the pandemic.
That has got to be difficult. Dr. Amy Compton-Phillips, we're going to continue with you, President of Clinical Care at Providence Health System. She is with us on the phone in Seattle. We're going to talk a little bit about pregnant women. It's something we've certainly touched upon, Tim.
Yeah, the data continues to roll in.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll get an update on that. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week, and this is Bloomberg Radio.
Broadcasting live from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio in New York. Bloomberg 1130 to Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 99.1 to Boston. Bloomberg 106.1 to San Francisco. Bloomberg 960 to the country. Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
Okay, to be a fly on the wall. Tim Stanovic, very smart person. I consider
Are you
myself...
going to blow up my spot?
No, I'm
Okay,
not going to
good.
tell him exactly. I consider
Thank
myself
you.
fairly smart. And it's a reminder of what goes on in Washington can always be, like, mind-boggling.
Fortunately, a little later in the show, we're going to be joined by our own Washington correspondent to help us out with this. Mike Dorning, White House deputy editor, is going to join us in just a few minutes.
In the meantime, we're going to get back to COVID and the vaccine, really talk about pregnant women and what you need to know about that. Dr. Amy Compton-Phillips will be back with us from Providence Health System.
All right, in the meantime, let's get a check of what is happening with the trading day. Here's Charlie Pellet.
In a word, up. Here's what's going on. We've got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all advancing. Dip buyers are back. They are returning to equity markets amid speculation that the worst sell-off since May has gone too far. Do have an IPO today. Eyewear retailer Warby Parker up and running, giving the company a market value of about $6 billion in the second direct listing of the week. Shares now up by about 34% with the $40 a share reference price assigned by the New York Stock Exchange. Again, right now, looking at Warby Parker, shares at 53.82. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all advancing right now. Defensive industries like utilities and consumer staples outperforming technology. S&P up 27. That is a gain of 0.6%. The Dow up 255, up 0.7%. NASDAQ up 0.3%, higher by 50 points again. S&P close to session highs. 10-year yield 1.54%. We've got gold up 0.5%, $17.25 the ounce, while crude West Texas Intermediate down 0.5%, $74.87 a barrel. Well, keeping an eye on Pfizer shares, they are pushing higher now by 1.1%. We've also got BioNTech shares up by 1.1% as well. AstraZeneca's ADRs up 3.6%. Moderna moving lower by 1.1%. Shares of Johnson & Johnson, they are declining now. J&J actually higher. J&J up by 0.9%. Pfizer and partner BioNTech have submitted their initial data to regulators about the use of their COVID-19 vaccine in children between the ages of 5 and 11, one step closer to bringing shots to school-age kids. Dr. Bhakti Hansadi is Associate Professor of Emergency Medicine at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, and she says researchers are right to be cautious with kids.
The only difference here is that children, there's much more variability, right? So adults, well, kind of all the same, have similar comorbidities. Children really evolve, right? Between 5 to 12, we all have children on this call. A 5-year-old's body physiology is very different to a 10-year-old, to a 12-year-old, and how they perceive symptoms, how they explain their symptoms. So much more attention to detail is required for this age group.
Dr. Bhakti Hansadi with the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, which is supported by Michael R. Bloomberg, founder of Bloomberg LP and Bloomberg Philanthropies. Micron Technology, after earnings, lower now by 1.7%. Recapping 10-year yield 1.54%. S&P up 28, up 0.6%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much for the update. Want to get back to our guest at this hour. It's Dr. Amy Compton-Phillips. She's president of clinical care at Providence Health System, still with us on the phone from Seattle. Dr. Compton-Phillips, let's talk a little bit about pregnant women. It's something Tim and I have talked a lot about. I know of friends who are thinking about getting pregnant. There are those that are pregnant who've been vaccinated. There are others who don't want to get the vaccine ahead of it. What can you tell us? There's lots of research and information being put out there.
There is lots of research, and the great news is that the vaccines are safe and effective in pregnant women. The reason that's great news is because moms and babies are at real risk from COVID, that particularly with the Delta wave, with the increased contagiousness of this particular germ and the fact that it is affecting so many young people, we have seen, one is too many. We have seen so many women who've come in pregnant and have either lost their baby because of the blood clotting that COVID itself causes and then disrupting flow to the placenta, so then the baby doesn't make it, and or moms themselves, because of the mild immunosuppression you get from pregnancy itself, not being able to fight off COVID. And then, the whole OBGYNs trying to decide, do we deliver this baby early to try to save mom's life, or what do we do? It's just a horrible thing for pregnant women to get severely ill from COVID. Preventing yourself with the shot is absolutely the best course.
But it's not something that many pregnant women are doing. Only 31% of pregnant people have been vaccinated, lower rates among Hispanic and Black people. How do you get that number? Why do you think that's happening, and how do you get that number up?
Well, I think pregnant women, or women who are even considering pregnancy, are always really, really worried about doing anything that might put the baby at risk, and appropriately so. It's why so many pregnant women I know are hesitant to take a Tylenol, much less anything else. And so I think being appropriately cautious is absolutely the right thing to do. I don't know that women know the fact that the risk of COVID while pregnant is so much higher than the risk of the vaccine, that we have a lot of data now. And I know this vaccine is reasonably new, but when you do a new vaccine in billions of people, literally across the globe, you get data very quickly. And we know that this vaccine is now safe and effective for pregnant women, and significantly more safe than getting COVID is when you're pregnant. Getting that word out is hard, and so it is part of the conversation to help ensure that we do get the word out. So our OBGYNs are beating the drums. In the papers, we're beating it. The American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, ACOG, is making sure that it's known. CDC is putting the information out, and still it takes really one-on-one conversation with women to know that the best thing they can do for a safe and healthy pregnancy is get the shot.
Doctor, one thing I want to do, playing devil's advocate, and we've only got about 45 seconds here, is there's someone saying, well, wait a minute, we don't know the data. We don't know when a kid is 5 or 10 whether there's some complications or something. What do you say to that? And I am playing devil's advocate a bit here.
Yeah, I'd say that delivering a baby to term and being able to raise that baby till they're 5 or 10 is a definite benefit, rather than having a complicated pregnancy that doesn't go to term because of COVID.
All right. We're going to leave it on that note. Always good to get your time with you. Please stay safe, and we wish you well, you and your team. Dr. Amy Compton-Phillips, President of Clinical Care at Providence Health System, on the phone from Seattle, Washington. What are you thinking?
Well, I'm thinking that, it's a still stark reminder that there's a long way to go when it comes to increasing vaccine or decreasing hesitancy, increasing uptake, especially among certain groups. And you're right about the data. It's ever evolving, and I think a lot of expectant moms, and I consider a lot of my friends in this category because I'm of the age where a lot of my friends are either pregnant or thinking about getting pregnant or just had kids.
Right.
We just don't know, but we do know that the CDC is telling pregnant moms to get it.
And many would argue that this is probably the most scrutinized vaccine in history, considering the amount of attention on it and what's at stake.
Right.
All right. We're going to continue here on Bloomberg Business Week. In the meantime, let's head back to D.C., our 99.1 newsroom in the nation's capital, and Nancy Lyons. Hey, Nance.
Hey, Carol. The Pentagon's top leaders returned to Capitol Hill today to answer questions from the House Armed Services Committee. Yesterday, it was the Senate. They're talking about the withdrawal from Afghanistan. Bloomberg's Irv Chapman has more from Washington.
Chairman Adam Smith focused on the recommendation to keep U.S. troops deployed.
The option of keeping 2,500 troops in Afghanistan in a peaceful and stable environment did not exist.
Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin.
My view is that you would have had to deploy more forces in order to protect ourselves. The Taliban had been clear that if we stayed there longer, they were going to recommence attacks on our forces.
General Frank McKenzie said again that his recommendations were taken into account by President Biden. Republicans underscored that the blame for pulling out on the announced date goes to the president. In Washington, Irv Chapman, Bloomberg Radio.
The House plans to move forward today with a vote on a bill extending the federal debt limit. The Treasury Department warned a default on debt obligations will happen in mid-October without extending the debt limit. An extension had been attached to a bill with government funding, but Republicans refused to vote on the debt ceiling, and that has drawn the ire of Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
The fact that the Republicans are being so irresponsible is no surprise, but nonetheless, disappointing, as always.
As for a vote on an infrastructure bill that Pelosi had planned for tomorrow, she's now saying she'll take it one step at a time. She says they're also busy on text for the larger social infrastructure bill. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Nancy Lyons. This is Bloomberg.
All right, Nancy Lyons there in D.C. with an update on world and national news. This story is among our most read on the Bloomberg in the past 8 hours. Marathon Asset Management, they are a distressed debt specialist, and they are issued by troubled developer China Evergrande Group. You may have heard of them. And this is according to the investment firm's co-founder and CEO, Bruce Richards. I was watching him on Bloomberg TV earlier today.
Yeah, Richards said in a Bloomberg TV interview that they're going to purchase Evergrande debt for the first time this week, and they're going to continue to do so at low prices. Evergrande 10% bonds due in 2023 led declines in the U.S. high-yield market on Wednesday, dropping 2.375 cents to $23.875 cents on the dollar.
Anytime there's a crisis, distressed debt, there's the investors who see that as an opportunity, right? Risk to the upside or risk to the downside, always yes, but higher risk, often higher reward can be the case. What's interesting is I think what Richards had to say in terms of some of his analysis. He spoke with Alex Steele and Guy Johnson. He said that Evergrande will eventually need to be restructured, although the company may, quote, kick the can by making some debt payments in the short term. Home buyers, suppliers, and Chinese bondholders are going to be paid before offshore investors. That was his take.
Well, interesting what he also said about the idea
his knowledge of what's going on.
Right, and interesting what he said too about the idea of it, of just the scale of it. Right, he said, "quote It's a problem for China, a problem for its housing market, a problem for the whole segment that relies on this. There's a lot of jobs related to this, and a lot of commerce related to this."
Well, and when we talk about housing, we're going to talk about housing a little bit later on Beyond the Bell. But housing has this trickle down, up, you name it. You know, you buy a home. You know, we know, was it in China? Was it a,
yeah.
Oh no, we talked about it here.
With Andy Brown.
Right, 1-to-1. You bought a home, you bought a car.
Washing machine.
Stuff to fill it. So there's a significant impact. You are purchasing commodities that are maybe, mined elsewhere. So there is a global impact. But what's interesting about these guys, they often have a seat at the table about what's going on. And so that's why we like to hear what they have to say.
Yeah, really, really great interview earlier today on Bloomberg Television.
Check it out at Bloomberg.com. You can listen to the entire interview. This is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all pushing higher. S&P close to session highs right now. The crowd of dip buyers returning to equity markets amid speculation that the worst sell-off since May had gone too far. Stocks extended gains as tech shares rebounded. NASDAQ now up 50, a gain of 0.3%. NASDAQ 100 index up by 0.5%. S&P up 27, a gain of 0.6. Dow Industrials up 239, up 0.7. Again, NASDAQ up by 0.3%. 10-year yield 1.54%. Spot gold down $8 the ounce, lower by 0.5%. 17.25. And West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.5%. 74.92 a barrel. Dollar Tree shares climbing the most since the start of the pandemic after the company boosted its share repurchase authorization. It also says it will move above the $1 an item price point that gave the discounter its name. Dollar Tree shares up now by 15.5%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Oh, my God, we're already talking about this story. We've been talking since it hit the terminal this morning. It's the cover story of Bloomberg Business Week, happens to also be the big take on the terminal. It's about insiders winning trades. When I read in, when I was reading in this morning, I usually scan.
You couldn't put it down?
I could not. I was sitting there with my coffee and just kept going because, I don't know, it's a fascinating story to me.
It really is, and it's a cover story for...
An insight into something that I don't think a lot of people know about.
And understandably, it's a little wonky too. So let's get into it. Joel Weber is editor at Bloomberg Business Week. He's with us in the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. Liam Vaughn is projects and investigations reporter for Bloomberg News, joining us on the phone from London. Joel, okay, insiders.
That's right.
How are they defined?
So, going to be careful here because there's I can hear my legal counsel on my shoulder advising me on how to say this. So, corporate executives get some privileged information, right? And some of that information is obviously non-public because it helps them do their jobs. But it also turns out that they have some special abilities to trade, and it also means that those trades get disclosed, so eventually we get to see what they do, and that's long been known. And what's really interesting about this story, I thought, was also that now there are websites set up to track and rank who's the best insider at trading.
And you can subscribe to them.
And you can subscribe, $30 a month. But the nuance here is also, it gets to the heart of capitalism is somebody getting an unfair advantage over the rest of us. So Liam, how does that break down, and how is this legal? Because it is.
Yeah. So if you look at the kind of the stories that dominate financial coverage, insider trading always rears its head. It was really big in the 80s. With Michael Milken and Boesky, and then again, when you had Sac Capital and Preet Bharara and stuff. But the thing is, the stories keep coming, but the issue never goes away. And I think fundamentally the reason for that is that the law in America around insider trading is just really shoddy and isn't really up to the task. So, for example, there's no crime of insider trading in America, in the same way that there is in the UK or in other places. What happens in America is that you have to charge people with securities fraud, and it's all done via kind of case law. There isn't an insider trading statute, even though people are pushing for that. And essentially, that really raises the bar behind bringing these cases, because to prove fraud, you have to demonstrate this thing called scienter, which is criminal intent. So you have to demonstrate that this insider trader knew they had inside information and deliberately set out to take advantage of it. And the problem with that is that even though you can sort of see, this CEO keeps getting very lucky, they can turn around and say, well, if you look at the information that was in the public domain already, it was pretty obvious that the shares were going to go up, or, I just had better ability to judge what was already out there. And it's very hard to prove them wrong. And if you think about normal insider trading cases, that you think of, like the SAC capitals of this world, then hopefully, if you're a prosecutor, you'll find some email or find some witness. Whereas in this, it's really just all going on in the executive's head. So, I spoke to a bunch of ex-SEC folks, ex-prosecutors, and they all said that these cases are just absolute pigs. And that's why they're largely, it's almost like an unprosecutable crime.
Essentially meaning that there isn't necessarily a case there, you're saying?
Well, it's just incredibly hard to demonstrate wrongful or criminal intent for prosecutors.
Yeah, Liam, what I found so fascinating about this was that even, some government lawyers who you talk to questioned how much damage these executive trading really causes, which makes me think it's like, wait a second.
Is it really that bad?
Is it really, is it a victimless crime?
Did somebody really get hurt?
Yeah, that really struck out to me about this story, so explain that, because not everybody thinks this is necessarily that bad.
Well, I think that's the thing that really appealed to me about the story, is the kind of moral and philosophical questions that it raises. So you've got someone like Preet Bharara, who kind of made his name as the sheriff of Wall Street, and he brought down all these insider traders. And then a load of his cases ended up having to be quashed because just down to this, function of this kind of squiggly law and the case law. But he would argue, look, it's about fairness. Like, fundamentally, elites in society shouldn't have an advantage when trading our financial markets over other people. And even if the losses are small or they're disparate and spread out, that's, fundamentally the principle at stake. Whereas other people, particularly economists, turn around and say, well, actually, by trading, these guys are helping making markets more efficient because they make disclosures, people can look at the disclosures, and ultimately it kind of helps grease the wheels of capitalism. And therefore, it's a bit like, I sort of make the analogy of like drug enforcement. It's almost like an unwinnable thing. So prosecutors will be better off just ignoring it altogether and accepting that this is kind of part and parcel of the way that the world works.
So
pick your side, really.
This is it's also rather timely because we have new chair in SEC. There's been some chatter in DC. What has been that chatter, and where could we see this conversation go on the regulatory front?
Yeah, so there's two things. One is at the high level, political, legislative level, where they're talking about actually introducing insider trading statutes and rules, which would have a quite profound impact. And then there's the more kind of rule-based stuff that's going on at the SEC, where they have actually talked about, and it looks like it could happen quite quickly, reforming one of the main culprits of this whole story, which are these kind of, they're called 10b5 trading plans. And basically what it is if you're an executive and you want to sell your stock, you can enter a plan with like a third party that says, I'm going to trade X amount of stock over this period of time. But the problem is these things are kind of rife with loopholes, and, there's been various kind of research showing how sort of vulnerable they are to abuse. So it looks like, at least on that side of things, on the trading plans thing, there could be some movement. But again, the way that the law is written, my understanding from people I've spoken to says that there's only certain things they can do. They can't completely solve the problem in the way that they'd like to, without ripping up the rule book and rewriting the whole insider trading law.
But there is an advantage. Let's be fair. Like an insider, whether they just soak up stuff as they walk around the offices, fair to say that they soak up a certain amount of information. There's got to be a little bit of bias in any trade that they do potentially.
And, maybe that's right, that you get rewarded for that, for doing such a good job, right? Or maybe not, and maybe this is something that we're going to hear more about.
I love this story. Must read, Bloomberg Big Take, cover story of Bloomberg Business Week. Joel Weber, editor of Bloomberg Business Week, here in our studio. Bloomberg News Projects and Investigations reporter Liam Vaughn on the phone in London. Check it out. This is Bloomberg.
Headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Dip buyers are back as we move into the final hour of trading on this Wednesday, September 29th. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ 100 index, and yes, Russell 2000, all moving higher right now. Dip buyers coming back to equity markets amid speculation that the worst sell-off since May has gone too far. Stocks are extending gains as tech shares rebound, though the advance in the S&P is being led by defensive industries like utilities and consumer staples. S&P up 31, up 0.7. Dow doing a little bit better, up 0.8%, up 277. NASDAQ up 64, up 0.4. NASDAQ 100 index up 0.6. Russell 2000 up 0.2. 10-year yield right now, 1.53%. So what about the bond market move over the past week or so and the inflation outlook? Megan Green is senior fellow at the Kennedy School.
If we continue to have supply chain disruptions, that will certainly feed into inflation, which I, for what it's worth, think is transitory, but will certainly be the case over the next 6 months or so. So I think that's the main factor. It could also be, to some degree, the waning Delta variant, suggesting that we're going to get a surge in growth, even though I think the best is behind us on the growth front. If we get more growth, that could be inflationary too.
United Airlines Holdings CEO Scott Kirby says every airline should have a COVID vaccine mandate. He also says that mandate is helping it attract job applicants. Kirby also says European bookings have surged now that the travel ban has been lifted. Mixed day for the airlines. UAL up 0.3%. American Airlines down 1.3%. Delta up 0.2%. Southwest lower by 0.6%. Cathie Wood has sold a near $270 million stake in Tesla as the bond sell-off hit rate-sensitive tech stocks to spur outflows from her growth-focused funds. Tesla now trading higher by 0.7. And that's a Bloomberg Business Flash.
This is Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Bloomberg Quick Takes Tim Stenovic on Bloomberg Radio.
So President Biden's economic agenda facing a pivotal day in Congress today, the prospects growing of a setback for his infrastructure bill and markets beginning to take notice of that intensifying debt ceiling standoff with Republicans. Among our most read, Tim, on the Bloomberg, about how the president's luster dimming a bit amid some stumbles and the latest round of congressional sniping.
Well, joining us now is Mike Dorning, White House deputy editor at Bloomberg News. He joins us on the phone from Washington, D.C. Mike, I saw just a tweet yesterday that I think really summed it up, what's happening in Washington. It basically said any normal person watching what's happening in Washington right now would really find it just incomprehensible. So where do we start?
Well, at the very beginning, no one says both parties agree that they don't want to default on the debt and they should raise the debt limit. But we're in this sort of crazy partisan thing where the Republicans say, even though we want to raise the debt limit, we're not going to help you do it. At the same time, there's this bipartisan bill to do a bunch of building around the country, infrastructure building, that actually passed the Senate with 60-some votes, which is a landslide in Washington these days, and they're having trouble getting it through the House. And it's all because Democratic moderates and progressives are sniping at each other, and the two parties are at war with each other in Washington. Well, we've got all these problems with COVID, wildfires in the West, people drowning in basement apartments in the East, all sorts of things going on.
It's not easy being president, I've heard.
It is not.
Especially during a pandemic. There's lots to go through here, but let's ask you, Mike. I mean, Tim and I, we were joking. We feel like we're relatively smart people, but every time there's a debt ceiling coming up, we're like Googling just to make sure we understand how this all works, because it feels like we have been here several times before. Explain the process and why it is so political.
So this is all because of an anachronism of something that they did in World War I, supposedly to make things easier for Congress. The Congress has the power to raise debt, and the Congress has the power to spend and tax. And Congress separately does the raising of the debt from the spending and taxing. So they've already passed legislation by a majority of the Congress, signed by the president, to have tax policies and spending that increases debt over time. But we hit this legal limit that they imposed during World War I, supposedly to make things easier, that you would just say it's okay to issue debt up to a separate thing that's going on this time, which is on September 30th, the money runs out for the government, just the regular spending.
Okay.
So they've got to come up with this like stopgap measure to tide them over a few weeks until they can deal with each other on the budget. And yesterday they tried to tie the two together. Okay, let's just keep financing things for a few more weeks and raise the debt limit, and that was voted down. They're working on something that everyone thinks will pass today or tomorrow to avoid the government shutdown that would otherwise come by Friday. But if by the middle of the month they don't raise the debt limit, then suddenly Uncle Sam's out of cash. And he can't pay the bondholders, he can't pay the Social Security recipients, he can't pay the employees. And that's kind of untrod territory because that's never happened before.
But a government shutdown has happened before, and that's when people remember that they couldn't go to national parks and certain zoos. And what are the chances of that happening again?
I think the chances of that happening it's possible, but very unlikely. I mean, both sides at the end of the day are willing to get together on that. And we may go up to the wire. But
I should note that there are a lot more repercussions than just not being able to go to national parks and, the national zoo, but, you get the idea.
Yeah, but at least when the partial government shutdown, the post office still delivers the mail, essential services continue, the FBI continues to investigate crimes, the Army continues to defend the country, but everything that is deemed not absolutely essential gets shut down.
It's so political. I mean, this is what's right, and Republicans have done it, Democrats have done it, depending on who's in power and who's on and what kind of president's in the White House. So I feel like we've seen this movie several times before. What do we need, right?
What's a little different is the Republicans are now using the debt limit as a hostage to try to avoid, to threaten to default on the debt limit. And that was something that they were more serious about in 2011 and 2013. Although this time, they, at the end of the day, don't want to default. They want to just make it hard for the Democrats.
Hey, Mike Dorning, your story goes into how this last few weeks in Washington and around the country have really hurt President Biden. And I'm wondering how sticky that is, and also how what's happening right now plays into 2022 and the midterms, which, hey, those are coming up pretty soon.
Just got about 45 seconds.
Okay. It's somewhat sticky. Biden and Democrats can and probably will get themselves past all this, and that will help a lot. But what's hurt Biden is this is all happening when COVID is back, when the economy is slowing down, when people's grocery bills are going up, gas prices are going up, the winter fuel supply looks ominous, Santa Claus supply chain's not working. Then you got all these real problems happening for people, and then Washington looks gummed up. That sort of makes things doubly worse. They can probably at least cure Washington being gummed up eventually, but he won't be ever riding as high as he was in June, probably.
My head hurts whenever we talk about this stuff. Mike Dorning, thank you, though. You clarified there's a lot of moving parts here going on, and it seems to be politics as usual, but with a few caveats.
Yeah, it's this is Washington right now.
Yeah.
Right? It's more political. I mean, we say this all the time, more political than ever, but it really does feel like that.
Just want to mention a headline crossing. China regulators to tighten scrutiny over FX dealers. This is coming from Reuters, just crossing a few minutes ago. Thanks to our Mike Dorning over in Washington.
Well, let's stay in Washington and get an update of the latest world and national news. Nancy Lyons joins us from our 99.1 newsroom in D.C. Hey, Nance.
Hey, Tim. Members of a Senate panel are debating the Supreme Court's shadow docket, where the court gives emergency rulings without arguments. That method was used to allow the Texas abortion law to take effect while that case makes its way through the lower courts. Republican Senator Chuck Grassley today defended the court.
We're having a hearing because the Supreme Court did not do something extraordinary. It declined to intervene on an exceedingly expedited basis while reserving judgment on complex legal issues.
Again, that was Senator Chuck Grassley. Democrats say the ruling set in motion an alarming precedent that is putting women's health at risk. A California judge is expected to rule today on whether to end Britney Spears' 13-year conservatorship. A judge will consider requests to remove her father as the authority over her estate and to terminate the legal arrangement altogether as requested by her father. The judge could also order another mental evaluation and appoint a temporary conservator who is not her father. After spending years and millions of dollars searching, the U.S. has given up on locating 23 birds, fish, and other species, declaring them extinct. Michelle Bogardus is with Fish and Wildlife Service and says most of the species were lost due to human actions.
The primary drivers of endangered species loss were habitat loss, habitat conversion, and the incursion of invasive species, or species that are not native.
Bogardus says the extinctions highlight the need to take action to prevent further losses. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries.
Thanks, Nance. Really appreciate it. Nancy Lyons in our 991 newsroom in the nation's capital. So much going on in D.C., as we just heard from our Mike Dorning, who is White House deputy editor. In the meantime, there's a lot going on with Amazon. We're going to dig a little bit deeper into it in just a moment because it's on our radar. But Macy's and Amazon.
Yeah, a little closer to home, at least for us. Macy's is suing its landlord over plans to allow a competing retailer to advertise on a billboard fixed to the department store's New York City flagship.
Yeah, Macy's said that Kaufman Realty Company was in conversation with a, quote, prominent online retailer. Herald Square site, we know that, which is the largest department store in the United States. The flagship has long been a point of pride for Macy's, which is planning to build a multi-billion-dollar skyscraper atop the store and invest in the surrounding area. So basically, you'd be at Macy's and you'd be staring at a big Amazon billboard. You could see them saying, can't get it at Macy's? Get it from us anytime.
Yeah.
If indeed it is Amazon. We don't know this.
Right. We don't know, but that's, a prominent online retailer, and Amazon is not named, but the chain said it believes that Amazon is the competitor there. Macy's had advertised on the billboard for, I got to get it right, got to get it right, nearly 60 years. It does still have the rights to the billboard on an adjacent building. That's according to a spokesperson who said, quote, "We expect to realize the benefits of these rights and have asked the court to protect them."
It's kind of funny. Only in New York.
It's a great story.
I get used to, though, you're walking down and there's just signs of everything and anything anywhere.
But, I mean, do you have to do it Amazon? Right? Do you have to?
If it's Amazon.
Yeah.
We still
if
don't
it is
know.
Amazon.
All right. To be continued.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. We've got 43 minutes to go ahead of the closing bell on Wall Street. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all advancing. We are close to session highs, but let's head right over to the first word breaking news desk for today's afternoon call. Here he is, Bill Maloney.
And good afternoon, Charlie. That's right. U.S. stocks are bouncing after yesterday's sell-off. The Dow currently up 261 points. S&P's gained 29. NASDAQ is higher by 54. The U.S. 10-year yield at 1.54%. Gold is down 9. Transports dropped 40 points. And Bitcoin is down by 1.3%. Among the main 11 S&P sectors, only materials were in the red. And leaders to the upside in the Dow, Boeing, Merck, and Amgen, while Caterpillar led to the downside. In other news, Warby Parker opened at 54.05. And in deal news, Walgreens is said to weigh a takeover offer of Evolent Health. Wrapping things up, Herman Miller reports after the bell. Live from the First Breaking News Desk, I'm Bill Maloney. Charlie.
Okay, we thank you very much, Bill. And to hear live breaking news over at your Bloomberg Time Squawk, SQUAWK on your terminal. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, got it, Charlie. Thank you so much. Well, meet George Jetson, maybe a little bit. Not really, but are you ready to welcome in Amazon's Astro robot?
Me?
I don't know. Are you?
No, I'm actually not.
Okay, no robots for
Sorry.
you. All right, and really, what is it for? And that's exactly what our Bloomberg News technology reporter Matt Day is asking in his latest story. He joins us on the phone in Seattle. Matt, good to have you here with Tim and myself. So tell us a little bit about the Astro robot.
So Astro is a little 1.5 tall, kind of a touchscreen on wheels. Amazon says it can follow you around, it can meet the family, it can do little security sweeps in your home. And it comes with a lot of the same voice-activated chops and capabilities that people would know from their Amazon smart speakers and Alexa devices.
Well, what is the need for this, right? Like, what is the problem this is solving?
That is a great question. And if you read the initial coverage since Amazon's launch yesterday, everybody is asking that question. Amazon, for their part, says, home security is a key capability of this thing. If you're gone, you can have it stream video of your kitchen or whatever to your smartphone, which is in keeping with a lot of Amazon's pitch recently with their home devices. It's basically a home security thing. There's that off the bat. But aside from that, there's not a whole lot that this can do that your smart speaker can't already do, or you might not need to be get done at all.
Okay, and just to be devil's advocate here, I had the same reaction when the first Alexa device came out years ago. I saw the video that Amazon put out, and I was like, "What is this thing?" And that thing ended up just being an absolute home run for the company. Is there any kind of feeling like that? Like, okay, this could be a sleeper hit, or this is like Amazon just throwing something against the wall and seeing if it sticks?
I think Amazon's position is they think it's ripe enough that they want to try, right? Like, just as they could put into the world a bare box, Echo and Alexa device that couldn't really do much at launch, but might evolve into something else. They're kind of planting the flag here. And I think, you're right to raise the Echo example, but that's definitely the optimistic take from inside Amazon, is that we think the tech is good enough that there's going to be home robots. We might as well be there in some form or fashion and see if we can, frankly, help customers figure out what to do with the thing.
Well, and maybe it's a first step. I mean, we all remember Boston Dynamics, right? And those incredible robots that are lifelike.
Terrifying.
Whether it's the dog, yeah, terrifying works too. But you do wonder about kind of where this is all going, and whether it's Amazon or other companies. I do feel like the world, Matt, to some extent is slowly moving in that direction. I mean, we don't mind that we've got a robot that vacuums our floors or rugs. Like, we're all in on that. So it's not too unusual, right, to kind of stretch a little bit that at some point we might have some robot that's moving around in our house, maybe checking on kids, maybe checking on elderly family members, maybe, I don't know, I'm not quite sure where this goes.
Yeah, I think nobody is, but we're really going to have to decide how comfortable we want to be with surveillance, which is one theme that Amazon they keep hawking, new devices with cameras and microphones on them, and that's great as long as you trust the company and have faith in what's going to be done with that data. But that's not something we've traditionally had in our homes.
Well, what are you hearing about that? Because it's interesting with younger generations. Sometimes I feel like, I don't want people watching me, and then they're on their phone constantly with location services, and you can find me wherever you want to find me. Increasingly, you walk into an office and you've got badges and different things and cameras throughout that are tracking you. We see increasingly in the United States, you see it a lot over in Europe or the UK, there's cameras outside everywhere, certainly over in China. So isn't that just kind of however you feel about it, that's kind of where we're all moving towards?
And there's a big chunk of the retail public that will tell you, they're taking all of my data anyway, might as well just get the cool new services. But I think what we've seen in the last couple of years is companies like Amazon and like Google that do amass a frankly, pretty frightening trove of info on us. They know they have to take this seriously, at least. So they have seen, I don't know whether we could call it a backlash, but enough of a groundswell of concern among consumers that they have to at least pay proper lip service to privacy and then ideally, listen to us on it.
Hey, Matt, got to ask you about other Amazon announcements yesterday that we saw from the company. The company announcing it's a Halo fitness service that competes with Apple and also competes with Peloton's app. We saw Peloton stock take a hit yesterday. Take us into everything they're offering.
So Halo Fitness, for a long time after Amazon released its Halo band, originally didn't have a screen. Folks speculated, of course, this is going to go into health and fitness tracking, and lo and behold, it is. Lo and behold, it does have a screen on the second version of the device. Amazon's hoping this is all going to be enough of a package to get you to subscribe to pay a monthly fee, something like $4 a month, to activate all of the sort of health tracking benefits that they say come with this thing. Halo was another Amazon product that got kind of mixed reviews at launch, so it remains to be seen whether there's going to be a big market for it, but certainly Wall Street's taking it seriously.
Hey, Matt, just quickly, so how much does any of this move the financial needle or have the potential to at Amazon, be it the robot or fitness?
It is unclear. They don't release a whole lot of data on it, but it's part of their long-term play to just keep us all engaged in their system and ideally buying some more stuff from their retail site while we're at it.
Astro robot for you, Matt Day?
Oh, I don't know. I'm not sure I could afford one at launch. We'll see if the price comes down.
$1,000 or $1,500 if you don't buy it at launch, right, Matt?
Yep, that's right.
And when is it going to be obsolete?
And if you want like pedigree or a name for it, a specific name, you have to pay even more. I
know Bezos is, he's no longer CEO of the company, but maybe he should have brought one to space a few months ago.
Stay tuned.
Yeah.
Brother, for that one. Matt Day, thank you. Technology reporter at Bloomberg News on the phone from Seattle. We all laughed at Elon Musk when he was going to try and disrupt the car industry, and look where we are. He disrupted it, and everybody's really following in his path.
Hey, but he doesn't have the robot out yet. Remember what happened at the announcement a few months ago?
Oh, that's
right. It was like the person dressed up as a robot. This is a real robot.
Yeah, that was kind of funny.
Yeah.
I felt like it was at Mum and Chance or something, or what is that called?
Broadcasting live from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio in New York. Bloomberg 1130 to Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 99.1 to Boston. Bloomberg 106.1 to San Francisco. Bloomberg 960 to the country. Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
If you're watching on YouTube, Tim was going to get his makeup.
Yeah, okay, I guess I am.
We're getting ready for our TV simulcast because we've just got about 29 minutes left in the trading day, and we're going to get the chart of the day in just a moment.
The chart of the day, the song of the day, and of course the stock of the day as well. NASDAQ higher by 0.2%, and the Dow's higher as well. But let's get all the details because Charlie Pellet is here right now with the latest on the trading day. Hey there, Charlie Pellet.
Well, hello there, Tim Stanovic. I do want to begin with a developing story. Sources tell Bloomberg Merck has agreed to buy drug maker Acceleron Pharmaceutical for $180 a share. This according to our deals reporter Ed Hammond. One source says the boards of both companies have agreed to an all-cash deal that could be announced as soon as tomorrow. Now, the move will see Merck take control of Acceleron's potentially lucrative pulmonary arterial hypertension drug. Merck shares are right now, we do have Merck trading higher, up by 3.1%. Acceleron, XLRN on the ticker there, lower by 3.5%. It is an up day, as Tim mentioned. The crowd of dip buyers returning to equity markets amid speculation the worst sell-off since May have gone too far. S&P up 23, higher by 0.5%. The Dow up 221, up 0.6. The Nasdaq Composite Index up now by 0.2%. 10-year yield 1.54%. Spot gold down $8 the ounce, down 0.5%, 17.25. And West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.5%, 74.88 a barrel. Sources tell Bloomberg the FDA is leaning toward authorizing half-dose booster shots of the Moderna coronavirus vaccine, satisfied that it's effective in shoring up protection. It comes amid the start of flu season, and hospitals are dealing with a strain of COVID patients. Dr. Bhakti Hansadi is Associate Professor of Emergency Medicine at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health.
We have a burnt-out workforce. We are stripped of our resources. We're seeing high needs for nurses countrywide. So there's a lot to watch here, right? And there is a possibility that, with the flu season, with people moving indoors, with some...
And Bloomberg Philanthropies. Pfizer shares up 1.4%. Its German partner BioNTech, the ADR, is up 0.9%. ADRs of AstraZeneca up 3.7%. Moderna out of Cambridge down 1%. J&J Johnson & Johnson up by 1%. Recapping stocks higher, S&P up 24, up 0.5. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thank you so much, Charlie Pellet. This is Bloomberg.
Is it Tom Petty? No, it's not Tom Petty. I didn't think so.
Is it the boss? Is it the boss? Is it the boss?
You're half right.
Yeah.
Now give me the other half.
Oh,
who's he with?
He's making a guest appearance.
With?
Wait.
That's what I'm waiting for.
Is it a band or an individual?
Individual. Associated with Indiana.
Is it, John Mellencamp?
Congratulations.
We did it. Teamwork. Go.
Oh, I thought John Mellencamp was associated with New Jersey.
No.
Oh.
That's John Bon Jovi. Okay. Can you get your Johns together?
Yeah, really,
Sorry,
Tim.
apologies,
Honestly.
with apologies to these two.
That is a brand new song. It's out
nice.
today. Got to get it on YouTube, get it on streaming services. Bruce recently went out to Indiana to record with Mellencamp, and then John came to New Jersey. They did the video mostly on Bruce's property, and actually his videographer,
so cool.
Tom Zimney, did the video.
That is so cool.
So there are 3 songs altogether that are coming out on Mellencamp's next album that Springsteen appears on.
What do you think of the song?
I like it.
Yeah.
It's got a nice vibe to it.
It does.
I like it.
It does. Little country, little folk, little rock. It's sort of a nice mix.
That little, you're right, that country sound. Dave Wilson, so take us to the chart of the day.
All right. Well, there have been a lot of wasted days this month when it comes to utility stocks. That's the point. It was something I was talking about last hour. If you look at the S&P 500 Utilities Index, it's been down for 14 days in a row. And that happens to be the longest string of declines, not only for this index, but also for any of the 11 main industry group gauges in the S&P 500. The record had been 13, which belonged to the S&P 500 Financials Index back in June 2018. Now, you want a sign that people are looking for interest rates to go higher. You don't get a better one than this. I mean, people tend to focus on the 10-year Treasury yield. That actually has fluctuated over the past 3 weeks or so. Not the utility stocks. They've been going down. And let's face it, these are companies that borrow a lot of money, so they're sensitive to the cost of that money. And also, they have shares that, because of their relatively high dividend yields, can be an alternative to bonds for investors looking for income. So if yields go up, there's certainly less of incentive to be in, the dividend-paying stocks like utilities.
It's funny because you hear about technology if yields are going higher. You hear about tech stocks and high growth stocks, but not utility. Like, this is new to me.
Well, utilities and real estate, I mean, they're sort of joined at the hip to some extent. It hasn't quite played out that way in markets lately, but similar arguments: relatively high dividend yields and a lot of borrowing, so that you think of them as perhaps the most interest rate sensitive groups now.
Right? Is that the thinking?
Yeah,
okay. Yeah. All right.
Okay.
Good to your stock of the day, if you
You
will.
remember Sallie Mae, Carol?
I do.
It became a company called Navient in 2014, at least the servicing business.
Right.
Of course, their whole thing was federal student loans.
Right.
They're getting out of the federal student loan business.
Which, again, that whole process. So what are they going to do?
They're unloading it to another company called Maximus, which is in the business. They also have a consumer lender, and they manage finances for businesses and governments. So that's what they're going to focus on. Let's just say this shift, though, isn't going over very well. Navient shares, the ticker NAVI, first four letters of the name, down almost 14%. And to put that in a bit of historical context, you are talking about the biggest decline for the stock since March of last year.
Not too good.
Okay, but this year it's up more than 96%.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Dave Wilson, look for Dave's Stock of the Day just after 4:15 p.m. Wall Street time on Facebook, LinkedIn, and on Twitter at @TheOneDave. Dave Wilson, thanks so much. Let's go to Washington, D.C. for a check of the latest world and national news. Nancy Lyons is standing by. Hey, Nance.
Hey, Tim. The FDA is leaning toward authorizing half-dose booster shots of the Moderna coronavirus vaccine, satisfied that that's effective in shoring up protection. That's according to people familiar with the matter. The authorization would set the stage to further widen the U.S. booster campaign after earlier authorization of the Pfizer shot. Meanwhile, Dr. Anthony Fauci believes it is best to wait for the same brand for your booster.
We do recommend for people who have gotten originally the Moderna to wait. It will be relatively soon where the FDA will be able to make a determination about the safety and efficacy for inducing an appropriate response.
About 170 million fully vaccinated people in the country received the Moderna or Pfizer shots, or 92% of the total inoculated so far. YouTube is reportedly taking down several video channels associated with anti-vaccine activists.
YouTube is banning prominent anti-vaccine activists and blocking all anti-vaccine content. It is a new set of policies designed to cut down on misinformation about vaccines, a move that Facebook made a few months ago. That includes content associated with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Joseph Mercola, who experts say are partially responsible for fomenting the skepticism that slowed vaccination rates around the country. In Washington, I'm Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries.
All right, Nance, thank you so much. Carol Masser, along with Tim Stenovic in our Interactive Brokers studio on this Wednesday, September 29th. Let's talk a little bit about Kathy Wood. We've been lucky enough to have her a lot on our air. She's been very gracious to talk about her investment strategy. I've been talking to her for about 7-8 years already since she began. And we do track, I would say, fairly regularly on a daily basis, her buying and selling, because you can track that.
She publishes it.
Well, it comes out because of it's an ETF, correct? And so she sold a near $270 million stake in Tesla as the bond sell-off hit rate-sensitive technology stocks to spur outflows from her growth-focused funds. I mean, she is all in when it comes to some of those big tech names.
She is, and we should note that even though she did sell a near $270 million stake in Tesla, about 11% of the ARK Innovation ETF is still betting on Elon Musk's company. So it was a little bit of a trim, but the firm does tend to trim a stake when it rises above 10%.
Right, exactly. And she's been involved in Tesla for a long time, really, with a tremendous ride when it comes to that company in particular. The firm, as you said, tends to trim when it rises above 10%. And that, we see that often with portfolios, right? You reassess what's maybe grown out of proportion or your designated allocations.
So since the Federal Reserve signaled last week a move to taper pandemic stimulus yields, we've talked about this a lot, they've jumped, they sent a shockwave through growth shares. ARK funds, remember, they're heavily exposed, as you mentioned, Carol, to such names, thanks to Wood's focus on disruptive innovation in tech. So if yields, and when yields go higher, a lot of her holdings and the holdings of the ARK Innovation ETF and other companies she has, they can take a hit.
When it comes to ARK Investment, I'm just looking at the Bloomberg, the holdings function, and it looks like they are the 17th biggest holder of Tesla shares, about 5.4 million roughly shares, or 0.5% of shares outstanding. This is as of June 30th, 2021, in terms of regulatory filings. But we know Tesla's been, they move up and down.
Yeah, they've done pretty well this month compared to the NASDAQ, at least.
Exactly. All right, you're listening to Bloomberg Radio.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. It is now a down day for the NASDAQ Composite Index. S&P losing steam here with 13 minutes to go ahead of the closing bell. The Dow up 152, now up by 0.4%. Bottom line, we're seeing dip buyers come into equity markets amid speculation that the worst sell-off since May perhaps had gone too far. Right now, the S&P is up 14, higher by 0.3%. Key takeaway, well-off session highs. The Dow up 156, up 0.5. NASDAQ, as I mentioned, trading lower, down 6 points now, drop there of just about 0.1%. We have got the 10-year yield at 1.54% right now. We've got gold, spot gold down 0.6%, $17.24 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude oil is lower by 0.7%, $74.75 for WTI. I'm keeping an eye on Warby Parker. It is up now by 35%. That compares, by the way, with the $40 a share reference price assigned by the New York Stock Exchange. That's how we get that 35% number. Warby shares right now $53.99. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thank you so much, Charlie Pellet. It's 3:48 on Wall Street.
The following is an editorial from Bloomberg Opinion.
CDC head Rochelle Walensky recently called gun violence a public health threat. Her words mark a welcome shift for the CDC, which for decades had been nearly silent on firearms. The last time a CDC director tried to tackle the issue was in the 1990s, when agency research had drawn criticism from the gun lobby. A Republican Congress promptly passed legislation blocking the CDC from spending resources to advocate or promote gun control. Over the next quarter century, virtually all federally funded gun research ground to a halt. This has hindered the response to America's gun violence epidemic. Thankfully, things are starting to change. In 2018, Congress effectively lifted restrictions on federal gun research. And in 2019, lawmakers approved $25 million for it. With Walensky now prioritizing the issue at the CDC, real progress seems possible. It's about time. This editorial was written by the Bloomberg Opinion Editorial Board. I'm David Shipley. For more Bloomberg Opinion, please go to Bloomberg.com/opinion or OPI and Go on the Bloomberg Terminal.
This has been Bloomberg Opinion.
I'm driving in my car.
How about you let me drive?
Oh, no. This is not a twin. Who's gonna drive you home? Honey, please, I'll do the driving. Drive on. Excuse me, I want to drive. It's
the question that drives us.
This is the Drive to the Close.
That funky music will drive us till the dawn.
On Bloomberg Radio.
So just about 10 and a half minutes left in today's trading session. It is time for the close. Carol Master along with Tim Stanovic. And we are seeing stocks taking another leg down. They're off their highs and lows of the session. Mixed trade, little change on the S&P, up about 0.4% on the Dow, down about 0.1% on the NASDAQ. Charlie breaking that down for you as well. Looking forward to our drive to the close guest, because James Chakmak is back with us, partner and technology analyst at the asset management firm Clockwise Capital. And James is back with us on the phone from Miami. James, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing okay.
So still in Miami, James? Not moving back to New York yet?
I was just in New York about a month ago for some meetings, but kind of permanently in Miami for the foreseeable future.
Okay. You're one of the many.
So
one of the many, exactly.
help me make some sense out of the market trade. It feels like things are getting a little tired. We're definitely seeing more volatility, especially when it comes to some of the big tech names. We took out the 90-day moving average this week. We're definitely below the 50-day on the S&P 500, but we are bouncing off and just hovering at that 90-day. We talk about, dip buying and so on and so forth, but it feels like that's becoming a weaker and weaker trade. How do you see it?
Sure. So at the beginning of this year, obviously, there was a lot of concerns around inflation and what's going to happen with interest rates and when is the Fed going to temper. And it appears that the market is seeing that those fears are coming into fruition. Now, the question I think that investors are asking themselves is this something that is a prolonged thing, a sustainable upward trend that's going to move against the market, against technology stocks particularly, or is this something that's a temporary phenomenon where we have supply constraints and we'll be able to go through it and see some positivity on the other side? So a lot of I think the moves are being exacerbated by algorithmic trading, but at the end of the day, that's the question that a lot of investors are asking themselves, including us.
What do you think? Is it permanent or is it temporary?
We think it's temporary. The analogy we make is this is the classic traffic jam where, this was somewhat self-inflicted by closing out the economy. But as we reopen it, there are going to be constraints in terms of getting distribution back on track on the supply side and also getting restocking back on track. So that's going to take time. We think it's going to be, it could last, several quarters, potentially longer, but there is brightness on the other side of it because at the end of the day, the supply and demand will recalibrate. The only caveat that we make outside of what we do, which is predominantly technology, is on the energy side where the inflation that you see there could be more prolonged than the rest of the sectors. But if you're looking at the predominant drivers of the market, technology being at the forefront, which is inherently deflationary in nature, we continue to have a very bullish posture over the near term as well as the longer term.
What you said about inflation really mirrors what we heard from Jay Powell, Christine Lagarde, Andrew Bailey of the Bank of the UK Bank, Bank of England, I should say, and BofJ's Kuroda at that ECB forum. They all talked about inflation, really dominated the discussion, and they basically said it's a supply chain constraints. The problem is, everybody feels in the dark right now because we don't know what the next leg of the pandemic. We understand the current leg, but we don't know what the next leg is. Having said that, you look at technology. What have you been buying? What have you been selling?
Sure. I think right now what you have to do is move up in quality. What you saw at the initial part of the reopening, that people were willing to move down balance sheet into lower quality names just to get that reopening bump. But at this point, given the lack of visibility that we have in terms of the duration of these impacts, not that it's going to be prolonged, but how long it will actually last, you have to move up into higher quality names. And secondly to that, you have to expose yourself and get exposure to the themes that are going to dominate the next cycle. We're moving toward a centralized world to a decentralized one, and every company that you analyze, will this company, given the direction that the world is going, into the direction that society is going, will these companies be more relevant in several years' time than they are today? So with that in mind, we really have exposure, long-time exposure in data management, in data security, companies that are involved in the next wave of social interaction with the metaverse, and the companies that bridge the gap between the analog world and the digital world via logistics.
What's the metaverse company that you're focused on? Facebook would like it to be itself to be the metaverse company. We heard that from Mark Zuckerberg in the most recent earnings call. What are you betting on?
Sure. I mean, Facebook, we have a position in that, and we think that they're going to be an integral part of it, just given the number of people that they serve. But we're looking at more as far as the next gen, bigger opportunities are concerned with the more pure play entities like Roblox and Unity. We have a small position in Unity software. So that's the one that we're playing right now.
You also like, from what I understand, CrowdStrike Holdings. You like Uber, Amazon, Square.
Yep, Square and Snowflake. All those tackle the big themes in the future. We're moving to the cloud. CrowdStrike helps you secure that. Moving to the cloud, Snowflake helps you manage that. Square is just disintermediating the card networks and financial institutions. And Unity we talked about, and Uber, Amazon tackle the whole logistics thing.
Is there, just quickly, we just have about 30 seconds left here. Is there a tech name that you think people are still plowing into, a big tech that you're like, it's done?
The one big tech name where we're starting to second guess ourselves, and this has been a long-term position, is Apple. We are looking at it with greater scrutiny now. Obviously, the growth opportunities are still pervasive there, just given their more proliferation of their devices.
Right.
But when you look at the economics of the business, it's predominantly going to be driven by their ability to continue to buy back shares versus more robust growth on the top line. So that's one where we're kind of second guessing in terms of how much of a position do we really want to have in this into the next chapter of our portfolio.
It's something I talked about with Kathy Wood, who said Apple's great, but ARC is about new technology, and she was looking forward. Always looking forward to when James Chakmak comes on with us. He's partner and tech analyst over at Clockwise Capital on the phone from Miami. All right, folks, it's that time of the day. We're going to get ready to be joined by our Bloomberg TV team for Beyond the Bell, live on Bloomberg Radio and Bloomberg TV, counting you down to the closing bell.
Beyond the Bell, Bloomberg's comprehensive cross-platform coverage of the U.S. market close starts right now.
And right now, we are 2 minutes away from the end of the trading day. Romaine Bostic, Taylor Riggs, Shanali Bassett counting you down to the closing bell. Here to help take us beyond the bell, our global simulcast team, Carol Massler, Tim Stenovic, bringing together our Bloomberg television, radio, and YouTube audiences worldwide. And Carol, it looks like some of the early gains that we saw here, that potential rebound, that dip buying, fading just a little bit here as we get to the final bell.
Yeah, it's dip buying really running out of steam. And as you say, it looks like for maybe the S&P and the NASDAQ, we might end at our lows of the session. B spoke out with some investment advice and some analytics, and they say the S&P 500 has seen a steady drop in the percentage of stocks above their 50 and 200-day moving averages since the spring. So if you look at breadth of the market, we're seeing that it's thinning out when it comes to those names moving to the upside, Tim.
Yeah, it looked like in the early part of the day that there would be some dip buyers coming in, but they really lost momentum later in the morning, gained some momentum just in the early part of the afternoon, but looking like we're finishing pretty close to session lows, at least on the S&P 500. The NASDAQ taking a hit today, too.
And Tim, what was so interesting is we were just speaking with Julian Emanuel from BTIG, the derivative strategist there, and saying that the institutions were pretty well hedged coming into this. They were net long, Shanali, but they had a lot of puts in place. But it was that retail trader who, you know, maybe didn't have some of those trades set up here. And so you wonder how much further exasperation that creates to the downside.
Truly, they didn't know how to follow them into the trades, and now they don't know how to follow them out of the trades. And now every bank and market maker around is looking at where the retail trader is for that incremental bid in the market.
All right, we're going to talk a lot about some of the technical levels, too. We talk about that 50-day moving average breach on the S&P 500 yesterday. We should point out that 100-day moving average sits right around 43.43 on the S&P 500. Looks like the S&P is going to close above that slightly at 43.58 and change as we wait for these numbers to settle, up 6 points or up about 0.1% here. The Dow Jones Industrial Average managing to stay in the green as well, up about 0.3% or 92 points. Now here's your red on the screen right now. The NASDAQ Composite down about 0.2% or 34 points. The NASDAQ 100 not on your screen, but that's also down about 0.1% here. And then when we talk about that cyclical trade, the small caps, the mid caps, the transports down 0.5%. The Russell 2000 looks like it's going to finish the day down by about 5 points or 0.2%.
All right, just want to mention some heads crossing the Bloomberg terminal. Keep in mind the inaugural EU-U.S. Trade and Technology Council was held today in technology. This is coming right after that newly formed group between Australia, U.S., and the U.K. when it comes to security. Well, here are the headlines. The European Union and the U.S. outlining plans for unity against non-market economies. The two vowing cooperation on trade, technology, and diplomacy first. Also, the U.S. and the EU Trade and Technology Council commenting this is their first joint statement, and they will cooperate on things like artificial intelligence, fighting unfair trade practices. They're also going to cut risk through investment screening. And so, not surprised, this is a new group, right, Romaine? But it also speaks to...
Did they mention China in there?
Yeah, well, this has China. I mean, this has China written all over it. Yeah, this is China written all over it.
Who's the target here?
Okay.
Non-market economies. What do you mean by that?
We'll get back to some of the markets, of course, here as we digest some of those trade headlines as well. And Carol, what really stood out to me is despite maybe an unchanged equity market on the day, there is a hint of it's more green than red for the radio audience when we break down the winners and the losers. But there is that sense of defensiveness tone that is underway. For example, it's utilities, it's food and beverage, it's household products, it's real estate, right? It's food and staples. Those are the sectors that are up 0.5 to about 1.5% on the day. There is a lot of green here in the worst performing sectors, but you have to notice the composition of what is in the red. Carol, it's dividend financials, it's energy, it's services, it's chips. it's transportation. That is the unwind of this reflationary sort of risk on day that we see here. And the unwind of that is those sectors are off about 1.5%.
Well, speaking of names that are gaining today, Dollar Tree, we've had some fun with this. That stock up 16.5%, closing at $100 and change here, topping the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ 100, soaring on news that it boosted its buyback by $1.05 to $2.5 billion. And let me ask you guys, they unveiled a plan. They're going to begin testing sales of products that cost more than $1. Yeah. Can they still call themselves Dollar Tree?
$5 Tree.
It doesn't have the same ring to it, Taylor.
Carol, we talked about that a little bit earlier.
Dollar's
gotta give
Tree.
it a try.
I guess so.
Yeah, it's moving up the ladder.
All right.
Luxury goods.
Exactly. All eyes on eyewear retailer Warby Parker. See what I did there? Another direct listing, and we saw that come out on the New York Stock Exchange, up 36% in its first day of public trading, closing at 54 and change. And then let's just mention Electronic Arts. I'm not quite sure what's up with this one, everyone, but it is up another 3% today, rallying for a fifth day, top of the NASDAQ 100 and S&P 500, up more than 10% roughly over that 5-day period. If you know why, please tweet me at Carol Masser.
All right, well, I know why some stocks are moving lower today. Let's get the red on the screen there. You can actually see that shares of Morgan Stanley finished the day down more than 2%. The bank was downgraded for a second time in 2 days. Oppenheimer cut its rating to perform from outperform, citing a lack of upside to its valuation. Morgan Stanley up 46% year-to-date versus a 35% rise in the KBW Bank Index. Micron Technology, we talked about this one yesterday when earnings came out. Shares finished the day down by 2%, all about that weak forecast, not just for sales, but for profit for the quarter that ends in November. The company saying that slowing demand from PC makers has been weighing on it. And speaking of slowing demand for PC makers, HP Inc. also finished the day down by more than 4%. It was downgraded to neutral from overweight at JP Morgan, lowered its price target to $30. The bank sees moderating tailwinds for the PC market. The idea is that, people worked from home so much over the last 18 months, they already upgraded their PCs. Do they need to do that again? Not necessarily, so moderating tailwinds for HPQ.
Let's take a look at where we are within a yield market. Unfortunately, it's sort of an unchanged kind of day, but there was some intraday movement, of course, with yields down and then yields flat, and then you're starting to catch a bid again with price higher, yield lower. You're down about 2 basis points, maybe 1, so not a whole lot to write about, Carol, but we've talked about sort of this new trading range as we've really felt yields higher in the last few days since that Fed meeting, and if this is sort of this new range that we can really expect. But if you want to talk about a range, you might want to talk about some of these dip buyers within your world of equities.
All right, are we really going to say there's a lot of dip buying today? I feel like it's tortured dip buying, right? And I mean, let's see whether or not what we're hovering around the 90-day moving average on the S&P 500. How do you guys see it? Because it feels like in other times when there's been a bunch of selling, they come in with a lot of conviction. This one to me seems a little bit tortured. The S&P 500, not quite an even split of gainers and losers, but nonetheless, it just seems a little rough.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, when you look at the price action itself, it's pretty tepid overall. I mean, I guess you did see some aggregate buying. You definitely saw it yesterday. That bore out in the data. And my guess is, based on what we saw today, it'll probably be a little bit lighter, but still to the positive side. I guess the question really is here is, what are people buying? And if they're just gravitating back to the Apples and Microsofts of the world, the defensive type of trades that we saw over the past few weeks and few months, does that really bode well? Or do we really want to see them, Tim, go back into your favorite meme stocks?
That's the question. But I think also the question has to do with, to what extent do people think that this could be the beginning of a bigger drop? I mean, we haven't had a 5% pullback, in almost a year at this point, and that's a long time to go without a pullback like this.
We've come close.
We've come close, but we're not there yet.
And remember, we were talking to Julian Emanuel of BTIG, and remember how much leverage investors have taken on to play in this market, and how that might exacerbate things when things get a little bit rougher than we see it right now. To Romaine's point, we saw that NASDAQ, we saw that Russell 2000 slip pretty quickly into the day today.
I did make a good point.
You did. Yes, you did.
It does, and he brought up a really good note earlier as well from Vanda Research. And it was interesting that retail investors, they are saying, were avid dip buyers during last week's sell-off, but they're much more price sensitive in doing so. And so on yesterday's 2% drawdown, I'm hearing the retail investors, they bought about $2 billion or so in equities. It's about the same amount that they did last November. So it sort of seems like maybe a little bit more discerning when it comes to when we get in.
There was also, though, a note out of Citigroup, and they had that great survey here where they talked about expectations among investors for inflation not only to persist, but more importantly, how that inflation could impact markets, and the idea that there's some expectations here for a much more significant pullback. 20% based on their survey actually seems to be somewhat realistic.
Can we talk about first-time home buyers? It is not easy to be a first-time home buyer in this market.
Home buyer, Carol.
What?
There's no such thing as a first-time home buyer. It's just people buying their third homes and private equity.
There are
buying
first-time home buyers.
Yeah, are there?
Well, yeah. If you're buying a home for the first time,
That private
Well,
equity
but the
is
part,
It's a myth.
real,
It's like
by the way.
Sasquatch.
But yeah, but it's such
Jeep
a challenge to do that because you have to have the capital in order to do that. You're not only competing with people who are buying a second home or buying their next home, but you're also competing with private equity right now, and you're competing with Zillow in some markets too.
And the question then becomes, if you start to see this rise in yields, what does that do to mortgage rates? Does that exacerbate the situation?
right, exactly. And prices are just off and running. All right.
How many
that
homes
does it.
do you have? Are you on your fourth?
This is our home away from home.
Sails. She lives on a sailboat in her free time.
Oh, that is right. I forgot about her yacht.
Did Romain say he made a good point before? I just want to see if we have to make a correction. All right, guys, we got to run. All right, that's going to do it for Beyond the Bell, our cross-platform coverage on radio, TV, and YouTube. We have some fun. We'll be back tomorrow at the same time, same place. It'll be Thursday. Yay.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Messer and Bloomberg Quick Takes Tim Stenovic on Bloomberg Radio.
First-time home buying. There are first-time home buyers.
There are, but I think it's a fair point is that it's such a challenging market to get into right now across the country.
How can you be a first-time home buyer?
Yeah, it's really difficult, and you find some would-be first-time home buyers right now saying, just throwing in the towel and saying, I can't do it. We've done, we've put in X number of offers.
We've seen the lines.
Yeah, the cash offers are too much for us to compete with. We're going to keep renting. We're going to take a break. There's so many examples of that.
And go to the Zillow story that we did, right?
Yeah.
That Zillow is no longer just about, okay, let me just find out what pricing is. They are buying. They are active in the home buying market, and
So
in some cases,
with them too.
Exactly. So it's not easy. It's a market, and markets work their way out. I'm just going to say that there are cycles and there are ups and downs.
Low interest rates have really benefited those who already own.
Exactly. That's fair. That's fair. Although rates are still really low.
They are.
All right.
Much more to talk about on this.
All right, let's get to world and national news. Over to Nancy Lyons in D.C. Hey, Nance.
Hey, Carol. Intense negotiations are ongoing among Democrats on President Biden's two big agenda items. The House may vote soon on the $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill, a bipartisan measure that's already cleared the Senate. The other one involves the $3.5 trillion social spending bill. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki.
The president has spoken over the last several days with a range of different voices. He knows the most constructive role he can play in this moment is working to unify Democrats on a path forward.
Psaki admits they are at a precarious time in the discussions. The Pentagon's top leaders returned to Capitol Hill today to answer questions from the House Armed Services Committee. They talked to the Senate yesterday. This was about the withdrawal from Afghanistan.
Chairman Adam Smith focused on the recommendation to keep U.S. troops deployed.
The option of keeping 2,500 troops in Afghanistan in a peaceful and stable environment did not exist.
Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin.
My view is that you would have had to deploy more forces in order to protect ourselves. The Taliban had been clear that if we stayed there longer, they were going to recommence attacks on our forces.
General Frank McKenzie said again that his recommendations were taken into account by President Biden. Republicans underscored that the blame for pulling out on the announced date goes to the president. In Washington, Irv Chapman, Bloomberg Radio.
GM says it'll bring Wi-Fi to its cars by 2023. Today, the car maker announced it'll install new software called Ultify, which can offer new smartphone-like features, including facial recognition to start the vehicle. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries.
All right, folks, since we got so much needling about first-time homebuyers, we thought we would bring you a little bit more because Prashant Gopal has a great story that is on the Bloomberg terminal. And the headline on it is first-time buyers getting crushed in a cutthroat U.S. housing market. It is a tough one. And I will say, if you also look at the home builders, they are on a tear. They've been up like 3 years in a row, up 30% so far this year, 26% higher last year, and up nearly 40% in 2019.
So I read this story.
Those are the publicly held home
right.
builders.
I read this story by Prashant Gopal early this this morning, and this is the anecdote I was
like,
thinking about when I was talking
honey.
about that. So Sarah and Cody Chapman, they live just outside of Nashville, in suburban Nashville. They work at a restaurant. They're in their 20s. They started this year full of hope. Their baby on the way, plans for a house of their own. They've lost a dozen bidding wars for homes under $300,000. They go up against mortgage borrowers with big down payments, telecommuters with out-of-state salaries, and Wall Street investors who are skipping the line by paying cash. Their daughter was born in April, and they're stuck right where they started, in a rental. Determination has given way to resignation.
So what's going on is there's record price gains for a lot of homes. We know that there's fevered competition, and so U.S. home ownership, which is a key driver of middle-class wealth, are just being crushed. First-time buyers accounted for 29% of existing home sales in August. That's the lowest share since January of 2019, below the 5-year average of 32%. This is according to the National Association of Realtors. So there's some stats for you. The share of government-backed mortgages often used for purchases by young people has also plunged since the start of the pandemic. So we talk about this uneven economic recovery. Some have done really, really well. Some are struggling.
So every friend we talk to who's looking for a house or was lucky enough to get a house, you hear a story about best and final. And that's what sellers are doing right now. They put a house on the market, depending on the market, and they say they have a couple showings, a couple open houses, and they say, we'll do our best and final offers by end of day tomorrow. And oftentimes it's significantly above asking. And it's a blind auction too, so you are incentivized to bid more because you don't know what the person next to you is bidding.
It's interesting, yeah, and we'll have to see how long this cycle continues.
Right.
People are moving around. Markets that weren't hot have become hot. And as you say, low interest rates are really fueling it as well. All right, we'll keep watching. This is Bloomberg.
news, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. A late day fade really happened in the final hour of trading. Turned out to be a down day for the NASDAQ Composite Index. S&P higher, up 6, up by 0.2. The Dow up 90 points, up by 0.3%. NASDAQ slumped 34, down 0.2%. NASDAQ 100 Index down 0.1%. Russell 2000 down 0.2. Bitcoin today dropped by 2%. The rally in tech shares fizzled out, weighing on the broader stock market, and the S&P pared most of its earlier gains as a drop in tech offset an advance in defensive industries like utilities and consumer staples. Gold, spot gold down 0.5%, $17.25 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.9%, $74.60 for a barrel of WTI. Eye-popping gains today for Warby Parker. That is the eyewear retailer. Shares up 36%, had a reference price of $40, ended the day at $54.49. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Well, Nguyen Coffee, it was founded by and is led by a first-generation Vietnamese American. She's the daughter of refugees, and it is based in Brooklyn. And appropriately so, joining us on National Coffee Day is the founder and CEO of Nguyen Coffee Supply. She is Sarah Nguyen. She's also an award-winning documentary filmmaker, co-founder of Lucy's Vietnamese Kitchen, a 2018 Google Next Gen tech policy leader, and yes, I feel like a slug in comparison, Tim.
Well, Sarah Nguyen joins us now, founder and CEO of Nguyen Coffee Supply, among the many other titles on honorifics.
Impressive,
from Carol.
Sarah.
Hey, what are you doing to celebrate, Sarah, National Coffee Day?
I'm having 6 cups of coffee and all my favorite brew methods.
Is that different? Is that different than a normal day, just so we know? 6 cups?
It's just one more.
Okay.
Just one more. Hey, listen, you have a great story. We have some time, and we'd love to dig into a little bit of your background. Tell us, about what moves and motivates you and got you to create this company, because you've done different things along the way.
Yeah, when I discovered that Vietnam was the second largest producer of coffee in the world, this really just blew my mind because I had no idea. And as a Vietnamese person, I was like, why don't I know this? And I realized it's because of lack of transparency. And so for myself, as a first-generation Asian American, I felt oftentimes really invisible and underrepresented, which is why I spent so much of my career in filmmaking and increasing representation for our stories. And so in a similar way, I felt like Vietnamese coffee, but more importantly, Vietnamese producers and communities have been rendered invisible in the coffee conversation as well, which led me to really carving out my own supply chain and bringing visibility to Vietnam as the second largest producer and starting Nguyen Coffee Supply.
So what's different about Vietnamese coffee? Because I'm looking at your website, and not all coffee, of course, depending on where it was grown, is created equal.
This is correct. It's correct. Well, I'd say for starters, it comes down to the variety. So the number one coffee variety that's grown and produced in Vietnam is the Robusta bean, which is a very, very special bean. It's our beloved Robusta. And in the coffee world, there are 2 main varieties, Arabica and Robusta. And Robusta beans have double the caffeine content and 60% less fats and sugars. And because it has such a high caffeine content, it actually acts as a natural pest repellent. And so it gets its name robust because it grows very robustly. And so in Vietnam, it's also the number 1 producer of Robusta coffee beans. It's 90% of its entire coffee production. So that is, I'd say, the number 1 specialty of Vietnamese coffee is the bean itself and how it tastes different, and it's highly caffeinated.
It sounds like you have a lot of caffeine. We're saying that with love, because I'm someone who's been like bouncing off the walls a little bit today, probably because of a lot of sleep and a little bit of caffeine. How easy was it to do it? Because you're going up against coffee's a funny market. You've got Starbucks dominating. You've got Dunkin' Donuts, and then you have lots of little coffee makers. Certainly, if you look at a city like New York or Chicago or San Francisco, how do you compete? How do you stand out? How tough is it?
Yeah, well, I'd say logistically, when I was first, starting to build a business and learning how to import and learning how to roast and just figure out all the things around FDA and importing and launching a company, that part was quite difficult because I had zero experience in the industry. But in terms of standing out, honestly, I feel like it's actually really easy because as crowded as the coffee market feels, actually there's literally no one else offering a single origin Vietnamese Robusta coffee, right? And it was because we pride ourselves in being a direct trade importer because no one else was offering this, and I couldn't even buy single origin Vietnamese coffee from a green bean buyer or importer because no one was paying attention to Vietnam as a specialty coffee producer, right?
So where do Vietnamese beans usually go?
Well, actually, interestingly enough, the top 3 importers of Vietnamese coffee beans are Germany, United States, and Italy, right? However, it's often being pushed into, non-discrete blends or maybe instant coffee products. And so a lot of people aren't aware that they're drinking Vietnamese coffee already.
What about when it comes to brew methods here? Because you said that you are celebrating National Coffee Day by doing different brew methods. And one thing that you can buy from Nguyen Coffee Supply is the Fin Filter collection. How is that? Can you explain how that coffee is brewed?
Yeah, so I like to describe the Fin Filter as, imagine if the V60 pour over and the French press had a baby.
Okay, so I know what those things are because I'm a big coffee fan. So I know that the Hario V60 is a pour over. So you put a filter in, you put your grinds on top, and it makes a single cup. Just to explain, right? And then the French press, of course, is the pot you can make for a few
French
people,
press.
and it's like a coarser grind. Yeah.
Yes. So the Fin Filter is right in the middle. It's a stainless steel brew tool where you put the coffee inside the brew chamber and it sits right on top of your cup of coffee. You have the pour over experience like a V60, and it's also a gravity extraction. So it's dripping into your cup. However, you also get the full immersion like a French press. There's a little piece that goes inside called the gravity press, very similar to French press because the French colonized Vietnam for many years, so there's a lot of French influences. Yeah.
That makes sense. I think Tim sees some buying in his future.
Yeah, I do. I don't have this brewing method at home yet. It's like the only one missing.
Do you sell, we're going to do some news in a moment, but before we go and then bring you back, we've got about 30 seconds. Do you sell also into the commercial space, restaurants and so on?
Yeah, so we're currently about 84% direct-to-consumer and 16% wholesale. So we do have some restaurant cafe partners across the country and also some retail grocery store partners in New York City.
All right, sit tight. We're going to do a little bit of news.
Have another cup of coffee.
No, don't. Don't.
Maybe we'll have a cup of coffee.
Maybe we'll have a cup of coffee. We're going to come back with Sarah Nguyen. She's founder and CEO of Nguyen Coffee Supply. She's really had an interesting life so far, and her company based over there in Brooklyn.
Hey, one thing I want to talk about, which we talked about this week, was how does she deal with the fluctuating costs of coffee beans?
Right, and supply chains right now. Yeah. I'm really curious about that.
Shipping costs, too?
Exactly. So we'll
do we have to eat those as consumers?
I don't know. We'll find out. I feel like people will pay a lot of money for a cup of coffee.
Yeah, I mean, I'm addicted.
You're addicted.
Yeah.
I'm good with the Bloomberg coffee upstairs.
Oh, I got to have something before I get out of bed, basically. I can't get out the door without coffee.
All right, we'll come back with her in just a moment. Carol Massar, Tim Stanovic, we are Bloomberg Radio.
Broadcasting live from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio in New York. Bloomberg 1130 to Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 99.1 to Boston. Bloomberg 106.1 to San Francisco. Bloomberg 960 to the country. Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
All right, Bloomberg Business Week. We're going to come back and continue talking with the founder and CEO of Newen Coffee Supply, based in Brooklyn, your hometown.
Yeah,
Home
base for like the last decade.
Yeah.
I'm still a Californian at heart.
I know.
Can't you tell by my chill demeanor?
You are. You are really chill. It's one of my favorite things about you.
I'm not that chill.
Even when he drinks coffee. All right, we're going to come back with Sarah Newen in just a moment. Let's get back to your top business stories, some of the news after the close. Here is Charlie Fowler.
Hi, thank you very much, Carol and Tim. Here's what's going on. Turned out to be a mixed day. Late day fizzle, late day fade. Call it what you want, but we had the S&P holding on to a 6-point gain, well off session highs, up by about 0.2%. You look at the GIP chart of the day's trading on the Bloomberg, you can really see what happened in that final hour. The Dow up 90, higher by about 0.3%. Nasdaq down 34, drop there of 0.2%. 10-year yield 1.52% right now. 10-year year up 5/32. Spot gold down 0.5, 17.26 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.9%, 74.65 a barrel. Stocks pared most of their gains into the close as a rally in tech shares fizzled out. Nasdaq 100 notched its third straight day of losses. Nasdaq 100 index today down by just about 0.1%. So it did turn out to be a mixed day. We had the 10-year yield, as I mentioned, 1.52%. Supply chain, certainly a major issue holding back the economic recovery. James Chakmak is technology analyst at Clockwise Capital. He was our guest right here on Bloomberg Business Week.
The analogy we make is this is the classic traffic jam where, this was somewhat self-inflicted by closing out the economy. But as we reopen it, there are going to be constraints in terms of getting distribution back on track on the supply side and also getting restocking back on track. So that's going to take time.
United Airlines Holdings CEO Scott Kirby says every airline should have a COVID vaccine mandate. Also says that mandate is helping it attract job applicants. UAL shares up today, little changed, up by 0.1%. AT&T has started telling its employees in management to get their COVID shots. That was back in August. Now it's telling everybody else, all the union employees, they've got to get vaccinations too, with a deadline of February 1st. AT&T up today by 0.6%. Big move higher for Dollar Tree. Shares climbed the most since the start of the pandemic after the company boosted its share repurchase program and said it would move above the $1 an item price point that gave the discounter its name. Shares of Dollar Tree today up by 16.5%. Recapping, S&P up 6, up 0.2. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Let's get back to our guest, Sarah Newen. She's founder and CEO at Newen Coffee Supply, still with us on the phone from Brooklyn, as we mentioned, a 2018 Google Next Gen Tech Policy Leader and award-winning documentary filmmaker. So let's get to it, Sarah. Tim brought it up. We talk so much with heads of companies, leaders of institutions. We're talking about supply chain management and the bottlenecks. What are you seeing specifically? And that has to do with getting your coffee beans, but also workforce. And let's talk about beans first. Can you get everything you need? And does it cost more or less?
Yeah, so at this juncture, we are able to get everything we need. And candidly, our prices have not changed because a lot of the price fluctuations that we're hearing about in the news is really related to Arabica farms in South America. And whereas Vietnam, because their primary production is Robusta, we haven't been affected yet.
You haven't?
But when it comes to supply chain and freight has just been abysmal, yes.
Okay, so just because you mentioned Arabica beans, they soared 30% over a 6-day stretch in late July. We talked about this yesterday with our big take, talking about Brazil. So what about when it comes to shipping? We checked in earlier this week with Ed Ludlow. He was at the Port of Los Angeles. Dozens of ships just stuck there.
Crazy.
How much is it costing you to get your beans?
Yeah, shipping has been horrible. It has been super backed and congested. I'd say the cost of shipping for us for getting a container has quadrupled, and we're super backed up. However, we've been preparing for this, so we've just been calling our orders way in advance, so we haven't run into any inventory issues yet, fortunately.
Okay, if the cost is quadrupled, have you had to raise the price of your beans when you sell them to suppliers, when you sell them to consumers? as a result?
Yeah, so we have not raised the prices of beans yet. We're trying to see what we can do to hold off. However, we may reconsider once we engage the incoming container with the extra cost.
What about workforce? Can you get everybody you need, or are you having to pay up for those employees? I'm not quite sure how big your company is and how many workers you've got.
Yeah, so our company is currently 5 full-time, and we also have about 8 part-time people in production. Workforce is challenging. There's always high turnover, and it's like a workers' market right now in New York City. But fortunately, we haven't had too many challenges there.
Meaning you haven't had to raise wages, or you have not had trouble getting talent?
Or holding on to them?
We haven't had trouble getting talent. We do have to hire, but we've raised wages just out of our own principle. We want to just compensate people better. Yeah.
So you've raised wages, and
Yes.
shipping costs have gone up, but you haven't raised the price of coffee yet.
We have not yet.
So you're just eating this?
Yes, we are eating this right now. Mm-hmm.
How much longer can you do that?
Great question. I believe when the new container comes in, we're going to have to take a serious look at how the quadrupled effective freight is going to affect our bottom line, and we're going to try to hold off as long as we can for our consumers. But our next container will be arriving in Q4, actually.
Does it come into, just because we're all in a shipping mindset, right? It's not waiting off the Port of LA. I'm guessing it's coming into Newark?
Tim wants to meet the
Correct.
container in Newark.
I do.
It's in New Jersey, correct. Yes, in Newark.
Hey, listen, just got about a minute or so left. It's been an interesting, rough couple of years between the pandemic, between what happened with George Floyd and other Black Americans. As an Asian American, a Vietnamese American, a female entrepreneur, how easy has it been for you in your path?
I love that framing, Carol, because often people frame it in a negative way. It's always a challenge, I'd say, being an Asian American woman in business. There are a lot of hurdles that I have to work through. There are a lot of perceptions and biases that I have to really challenge. It's challenging, but honestly, I would say that the support of the community and our customers really keeps me going. People have been really open to a shifting narrative around Vietnamese coffee. I think one just related to the tick and anti-Asian violence, right? This idea of devaluing Asian lives is actually related to how people devalue Asian food and culture very often, and it relates to how people devalue Vietnamese coffee, right? It's all related, and so that has been a challenge in itself. But really, with our company, where it shifts the narrative and bringing value and visibility to Vietnamese coffee and producers, and I hope that will also translate to how people value our communities and lives behind our products as well.
Well, we appreciate you coming on because you really helped shape that narrative and get it out certainly to our listeners. Are you done with coffee drinking for the day, though? We just want to know, Sarah.
Yeah, we're hopping over to happy hour right now with Boulevardiers.
Okay, well done. From coffee to whatever.
Cocktails.
Sarah Nguyen, thank you so much. Really enjoyed it. Founder and CEO of Nguyen Coffee Supply on the phone from Brooklyn. What's your coffee of choice?
I like a coffee that's brewed in Brooklyn, Cafe Integral. My friend runs the shop. Small Nicaraguan coffee.
Oh, that sounds good. Just plain though?
Yeah, but I got to try this.
Plain with cream or what?
Espresso.
Espresso.
Yeah.
Okay. We got to go to Nancy Lyons. She is in D.C. with a check on world and national news. Off to you, Nance.
Thanks, Carol. Members of a Senate panel today debated the Supreme Court's shadow docket, where the court gives emergency rulings without arguments. That method was used to allow the Texas abortion law to take effect while the case makes its way through the lower courts. Republican Senator Chuck Grassley today defended the court.
We're having a hearing because the Supreme Court did not do something extraordinary. It declined to intervene on an exceedingly expedited basis while reserving judgment on complex legal issues.
Again, that was Senator Chuck Grassley. Democrats say the ruling set in motion an alarming precedent that is putting women's health at risk. A California judge is expected to rule today on whether to end Britney Spears' 13-year conservatorship. A judge is considering requests to remove her father as the authority over her estate, and also whether to terminate the legal arrangement altogether as requested by her father. The judge could also order another mental evaluation and appoint a temporary conservator who is not her father. After spending years and millions of dollars searching, the U.S. has given up on locating 23 bird, fish, and other species, declaring them extinct. Michelle Bogardus is with Fish and Wildlife Service and says most of the species were lost due to human actions.
The primary drivers of endangered species loss were habitat loss, habitat conversion, and the incursion of invasive species, or species that are not native.
Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts.
All right, Nance, thank you so much. Has there been a made-for-TV movie yet on Varsity Blues?
Not to my knowledge, but I don't have an exhaustive catalog.
Okay.
There should be. There's got to be one in the works if there hasn't been one.
Well, there's another story by our Patricia Hurtado, and obviously the Varsity Blues scam, or I should say scandal, which is where you had parents involved with an individual called Rick Singer, who was really the mastermind of Varsity Blues, the college admissions fraud, and working with him, paying money that went to the school, and their kids got into these some of these prestigious schools.
Yes. So he made $28 million in this college. Singer did, yes. That's according to a forensic accountant for the government. So Lauren George laid out the disgraced college consultant's earnings in detail for the first time on Wednesday. As a government witness in the trial of two of his former clients, Singer invested some of his money in the Swansea City Football Club in Wales and the Sharky's chain of West Coast Mexican restaurants previously released court records show.
So the vast majority of his money came from parents, approximately $26 million by parents, according to this forensic accounting. It all flowed into his personal accounts. The amounts that were detailed were slightly higher than the $25 million then Massachusetts U.S. Attorney Andrew Liling cited when he announced the case in 2019. As these cases go on, as either people go and spend some time in jail or things are working out, we're finding out more particulars, right, in terms of what Singer got, how it all worked.
And we got some more details on where the cash went. So Singer spent more than $20 million of his money, some of it in furtherance of the scheme. That's according to the forensic accountant Lauren George. He paid around $7 million to various university sports foundations as well as school officials, according to the forensic accountant.
Yeah. So again, we're really follow the money.
Yeah.
Understanding how much money went from parents into his accounts, and then what did he do with it? And it sounds like he did some investments. I think some of it obviously went to schools. We know that. But again, we continue to get more and more on Varsity Blues as it comes out. This is Bloomberg.
facts, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Sources tell Bloomberg Merck has agreed to buy drug maker Acceleron Pharma for $180 a share. Acceleron down more than 4% on the news today. Merck shares up by 2.4%. Our deals reporter Ed Hammond says the boards of both companies have agreed to an all-cash deal that could be announced as soon as tomorrow. Turned out to be a mixed day. Late day fade here. The S&P up 6, higher by about 0.2%. The Dow up 90, higher by 0.3%. NASDAQ is where the real damage was down another 34 points, down 0.2%. The NASDAQ 100 index lower today by 0.1%. NASDAQ 100 notching its third straight day of losses after earlier climbing by about 1%. 10-year yield 1.52% today. Spot gold down 0.5%, 17.26 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.9%, 74.61 a barrel. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
So yesterday we talked about how to fix the burnout epidemic. We did that with Jennifer Moss. She's got a new book out about it. Today we want to look into creating growth in your life. And Tim, with us is Susan Ashford. She's professor of management and organizations over at the Ross School of Business at the University of Michigan. She's got a new book out. It's called The Power of Flexing: How to Use Small Daily Experiments to Create Big Life-Changing Growth. She joins us on the phone in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Sue, nice to have you here on Bloomberg Radio. So let's talk about this, because I always think about how to best use my time and when you're given opportunities, and how do we do the best things, take the right steps that really do create growth personally, professionally, and so on. You talk about flexing. I think we need to start there. What do you mean by flexing?
It means,
we are having some technical problems. Hopefully, we're going to get that phone line fixed, because we definitely want to hear her clearly. So we'll come back to her in just a moment.
I love the idea of making these, I think when it comes to, and look, I'm speaking from my own personal experience, but when it comes to making changes in one's life, we oftentimes think that we have to make huge shifts. And research has shown that if you make small shifts that aren't as big, that over time, they continue to add up and they can lead to bigger things.
So meaning what? Taking small moves?
Yeah, like in the sense of okay, let's say you want to have a New Year's resolution, right? Mm-hmm. And you want to do, I don't know, something with working out or something, right? Start small. Don't start big. And just build up from there. Because ultimately, it's much more manageable.
And it adds, over time, adds to something, right?
Yeah.
No, it's interesting too, and I do wonder about leadership management. We've had lots of conversations, right? How the pandemic is changing how we think about things, because we certainly can work differently. We're thinking about stress differently, perhaps. We talked about burnout yesterday specifically, but you do think about what are the little things, the little tweaks you can do in your world that ultimately lead up to some big changes.
Especially if you get feedback that, we're getting to that time of year, right, where we're ending the year, we're thinking about,
reviews?
Yeah, reviews, reflecting on how we did over the last year, what we want to change about next year.
Right.
It's important to keep this stuff in mind.
I also think it's very easy, and people might say, may agree or disagree, but it's so easy to get distracted and caught up in stuff that doesn't necessarily bring around growth. You're laughing. I think about email. I will turn away from it in order to work on things. But then it's like people are like, well, I just emailed you. Why didn't you hear that and stuff? So let's bring back, we've got her now, Sue Ashford. She's professor at the Ross School of Business at University of Michigan. And as we mentioned before, her book, The Power of Flexing: How to Use Small Daily Experiments to Create Big Life-Changing Growth, with us from Ann Arbor. So Sue, take it away. What do you mean by flexing?
Yes, I heard your question about what it means for you as an individual. And what it really means is just that we need to go at our growth by trying new and different things, not doing the same thing we've always done, but trying mini experiments in order to grow on a particular dimension. Say you want to be a better listener or be more influential in meetings. Trying out some different things in those meetings and finding ways to get feedback so that you can adopt or drop things depending on how they work.
I like this idea of being a better listener because I think oftentimes we are distracted by things, whether it's, a screen or something happening, during a Zoom call that's off camera. What can you tell us about an experiment like that to make somebody a better listener? How would he or she work on that?
Sure. I mean, there's a lot of different things you could try if you're talking about this virtual space where we've all become much worse listeners because we're more apt to multitask. It's, setting up a time when you want to listen to putting away your devices, moving away from the screen. That would be one experiment. Another experiment would be starting your comment by reflecting back something you heard in their comment so that, you really have to listen in order to do that. You can't do it without listening. So it kind of forces you into a listening mode. And then the third is eye contact. People need to know you're listening. So that involves eye contact from you, nodding and affirmations from you to communicate that listening.
Yeah, that's significant. We're just, for those folks on YouTube, I was playing a little bit because Sue, Tim and I have these like polls in front of us. So we go to look at each other, make eye contact, and we're like, poll. There's page 83 in your book. You talk about, let's say you've got a flex goal of becoming more influential in meetings. And meetings to me, I just love watching the dynamics of a meeting. In fact, we went to a meeting where it was like a morning meeting and it became so crowded because everybody wanted to be seen by the big bosses. It was like setting the tone for the day that finally at one point the big boss was like, we don't need all of you here. We know you work for us. We don't need all of you here. But anyway, it says, let's say you want to become better at shaping the attitudes and opinions of the others attending meetings so that the group makes more decisions that you support. You might decide to pursue this goal by changing your behavior during your weekly meetings. And you might come up with basically holding back, speaking last in your team meetings, that it might increase the degree of influence you have over the decisions made. So in other words, you pick something and you actually run an experiment and see if it goes your way.
Right, that's the essence of flexing, but that picking something is really important as well.
Yeah.
So we learn a lot about how to become more effective through the experiences we have, but we don't learn anything if we're not really in the experiences. If we're thinking about where we were, thinking about where we're going, we're not in the experience. And deciding to focus on something about your development is the only way you're going to learn more about your development from your experiences. So setting that focus, I want to be more influential, and then you decide to try a few things. But you're kind of paying attention to that as well as what you're trying to get done content-wise in the meeting.
I'm wondering about feedback versus this coming from within, right? If you get feedback during a review that you need to be more of a certain way, or your manager would like to see you be more of a certain way, how do you take that feedback and help yourself actually make those changes?
Well, I think if you're going into the situation and you operate with more of a learning mindset, which is another thing we emphasize in the book, feedback is great information. I mostly prepare leaders, and leadership is a contact sport. You do it interpersonally. So it's subjectively evaluated. So you need to know how others see you. So it's really good information that your boss sees you this way or thinks you need to grow in that way. And then there's always a tension between doing what everybody around you wants and then following values that you hold dear. And you're always trying to keep that in balance.
A lot to think about, but it is very smart of like focusing on one thing and then kind of running a little experiment and then seeing how it goes. Sue Ashford, thank you so much. Over at the Ross School of Business at University of Michigan, her new book is The Power of Flexing, How to Use Small Daily Experiments to Create Big Life-Changing Growth. Coming up, Sound On with Joe Matthew. Joe Matthew, what's on tap?
We're joining you live from the West Wing. We're at the White House today, guys, where President Biden is meeting as we speak with Nancy Pelosi. Chuck Schumer also coming down the road because we are 1 day away now from a possible government shutdown. We'll have more straight ahead.
That's Sound On, yeah, coming up just a couple of minutes right here on Bloomberg Radio.